In my career as a software entrepreneur, I've sold millions and millions of dollars worth of software. And then as a hobby, I've backed almost 300 Kickstarters, but I had never run a Kickstarter myself. And if you know me or you know this channel, you'll know that in addition to building, launching, growing, and selling SaaS companies, I have now written 4 books about being an entrepreneur. But prior to this, I've always launched my books with a landing page and a Stripe link. People could pre-order and then we'd print the books. But for the first time ever, I ran a Kickstarter just a couple of months ago. So in this video, I'm gonna dive into the steps that helped me raise $108,000 on Kickstarter for my new book, The SaaS Playbook. I'm Rob Walling, a serial entrepreneur with multiple exits. I've written 4 books on building startups, including one that I kickstarted that we're going to talk about today, and I've invested in more than 150 companies. One question you might be thinking about, and it's one that I received frequently, is why run a Kickstarter at all? I could have put up a landing page, taken some pre-orders, and printed books. In fact, I've done that for multiple books before this one. But there were a few reasons why I wanted to delve into the world of Kickstarter. The first one is that I've always done paperback print on demand in the past. And in this case, I wanted to print hardcover books, which can take several months of lead time to get done. Really, if you go to Hong Kong or China, it's 6-7 months to get books printed. And if you put up a landing page and you take someone's payment up front, you're really not supposed to charge a credit card 6 or 7 months before you fulfill an order. So really what I wanted to do is take pre-orders in a way that fit within the confines of our financial system. So I really needed a pre-order system. And that's exactly what Kickstarter is. In addition, I wanted a lot of different tiers from $30 all the way up to $5,000, which is what we ended up with in the Kickstarter. So again, is there a system that exists in the world where you can put a bunch of tiers and allow people to choose from and it's just all baked in? That's Kickstarter. In addition, I wanted to take advantage of the community or the social network, if you will, of Kickstarter. I have reach into YouTube, into Twitter, podcast landscape, blogs. There's a lot of places where I have content. But although I've backed close to 300 Kickstarters, I have never run one myself. And I wanted to see if I could find new people, a new audience on Kickstarter, because it turns out about 5 to 10% of people who backed the campaign found me through the natural search on Kickstarter, telling me that they didn't come from my existing audience. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I'm an entrepreneur. I love learning new things. I love trying hard things and challenging myself to get better at them. Even if maybe I make mistakes, maybe I fail. I wanted to know what it felt like to run a Kickstarter since I've never done it. That's what we do as entrepreneurs, right? We take measured risks, and running a Kickstarter was exactly that for me. Now, back in the day when I published my first book, Start Small, Stay Small, this is 13 years ago. I wrote the book. I did the layout. I designed the really ugly cover. I did all the project management work. I bought the ISBN. I wrote the marketing and the landing page copy. I submitted it to Amazon's print on demand and on and on and on. But that takes time. And if you're in that situation where you have the time to do it and you don't have the money to hire a team, just do it yourself. I've done this kind of stuff myself for conferences, for launching books, for launching software products. You have to grind it out in the early days. It just takes time. Do the work. These days, of course, I'm running MicroConf and Tiny Seed, this YouTube channel. I'm putting out 52 podcast episodes a year, and I don't have all the time to do all the stuff I did for my first book. So in this case, I did hire a project manager who helped coordinate everything. Then we hired a designer, someone to do layout, and I'm at the point in my career where I do need to trade money for time. And if you're in that situation, that's great. But if you're not there yet, then put in the time. There's no excuses. Here's what I don't want to see are YouTube comments saying, oh, you could do this because you have the money. I didn't have the money back in the day. And in fact, that first book has made low 6 figures for me in sales over the course of its lifespan. So for the first 3 books, I ground it out, and you might need to as well. Let's dive into the 6 tips that helped me raise $108,000 in just about 23 days on Kickstarter. The first thing you have to focus on is a great landing page. We spent about 50 days developing the landing page and the video, and I wound up spending about $9,500 on contractors, folks who did graphic design. I had professional photos taken. I had a copywriter write a video script, and we really stayed on top of the project's timeline, and a copywriter wrote the landing page copy to make sure that timeline was communicated, the rewards were communicated. We spent a ton of time. Again, back in the day, I would have done all this myself, probably spent several weeks of effort. These days, I spent just under $10,000 to really make sure that the design and the copy was up to snuff and that the video production quality was high. Tip number 2 is to build an audience. If you don't have an audience, I think running a Kickstarter is going to be a challenge. You'll hear me say on this channel, if you're building SaaS, build your network, not your audience. But if you're selling a book, if you're selling information, you need to build an audience. I just don't see any two ways around doing that. So if you're gifted on the microphone, start a podcast. If you're gifted on video, start a YouTube channel. If you're great with written words, you have a blog, you can write books, you can be on Twitter, but I wouldn't run a Kickstarter without an audience personally. And once you have built that audience, doesn't need to be huge, doesn't need to be tens of thousands of people. But even if it's just a few thousand people who hang on your every word, if you run a Kickstarter, you need to communicate with them a lot. We sent about 10 emails plus a bunch of tweets. Most of the emails were pre-campaign or during the first week. And we used emails to educate my audience about what Kickstarter is, to ask them to sign up in advance, to explain why I was running a Kickstarter. And so people could get to know the platform such that the day it launched, we could fully fund the campaign. My goal was $20,000. I wanted to fully fund that within a few hours, certainly within the first 24 hours. And the good news is, I think it worked because we really didn't have to do any customer support around Kickstarter or answering very many questions in the early days. We also asked people to spread the word. We had clear calls to action, asking them to tweet or let their audiences know, and a lot of people did. One thing to note, we spoke with several consultants who run Kickstarter campaigns, and they were not going to be valuable to us. They are more for folks who don't have audiences. So if you have zero audience and you need to build it from scratch fast, running ads and such, you might want to get a consultant involved. I was wary of consultants who were going to ask for a percentage of my campaign. So they wanted 5 or 10% or whatever that number is. But the problem is my campaign was going to be funded almost instantly. And I thought that we could hit 6 figures, which we did. So it didn't seem to make sense that I would be sharing that with them when I could do that on my own because I did have an audience. Tip number 3 is something that I heard from several friends of mine who've run successful campaigns, and it's to keep the number of tiers to 7 or fewer to avoid that paradox of choice. We offered a pretty wide range of tiers from $30 up to $5,000. And besides offering that wide range, I wanted one that was quite expensive to anchor the rest of the prices, even if we didn't sell any of those tiers. The other tiers that worked well for us were those with limited quantities. They were super engaging for the audience. So I believe we had limits of 8 for one-on-one consulting. We might have raised that later. And then we had a limit of say 12 for group calls. And I think there's an asynchronous group call for 25 people, and those booked up very quickly. The 4th tip is a logistical one. It's that if you're going to ship physical products, have all of that ironed out in advance. We knew who was going to print the book and which fulfillment house was going to ship the book before we even started the campaign. Therefore, we knew what countries we could ship to, what the costs would be, both for the books, for postage, for handling, all of that before the Kickstarter ever went live. Because if you're guesstimating it, you're gonna be wrong and you're likely going to go in the hole. You don't wanna owe money after you run your Kickstarter. So be sure that you really know your numbers going into your campaign. And a corollary to that is find a fulfillment center that knows how to work with crowdfunding campaigns. It will save you a lot of time and a lot of explaining. Tip number 5 is one I heard from friends and a couple consultants, and it's to launch on a Tuesday and end on a Thursday. I let my campaign run for 23 days. I was originally gonna let it run for about 16 because I thought that we'd get like 40% of the purchases on the first day or two and 40% on the last day or two, and then 20% sprinkled throughout. But it was honestly a lot more than I expected, a lot more evenly dispersed. New backers were coming in daily, and I am glad that we made the campaign run long. Something else to think about, especially if you have access to an audience, is try to maximize the first day backing so that you hit your campaign goal quickly and you can potentially be featured on the Kickstarter homepage. We actually did the pre-announcement so people could sign up to be notified exactly when we launched, and that allowed us to fund within a few hours of launching. I set my goal pretty low at $20,000. That was actually not as much money as I needed to pay for everything and to print the books, but I wanted to fund quickly. And the 6th and final tip is to think about an alternate way of taking pre-orders and how are you going to take orders the moment that your Kickstarter stops. Because what we found is there were a lot of people, like a dozen per day for the first few days after the Kickstarter ended, who wanted to continue backing the product. And so we went and set up a Squarespace shop because my website, SaaS Playbook, is hosted on Squarespace. Certainly you could use Shopify or WooCommerce or any other e-commerce platform. And we are still taking pre-orders. books. And that helped us for a number of reasons. There were some people who just didn't want to sign up for a Kickstarter, and so we sent them to SaaSPlaybook.com. I didn't want to raise a ton of money that way, but I was able to filter a few people over there during the campaign. And then the moment that it ended, we were still making a lot of noise, and we wanted to keep selling to those folks who found out later about the Kickstarter after it had closed. And even to this day, which is almost a month later, I'm still getting 2-3 purchases trickling through. If you're interested in checking out the book, you should head to SaaSPlaybook.com. You can obviously order electronic copies and physical copies if you're in the US. The book will be available in physical form on Amazon in just a few months in fall of 2023. So in my entrepreneurial journey, I've made 40, 50 times more money from building and selling SaaS companies than I have from writing books or selling information. So if you want to see how I gain the expertise to be able to write these books and to be able to talk about these topics on YouTube about building SaaS companies, here's a great video to watch.